Okay, once more from the top with feeling. The following account has developed in much the same way as a family photo album. I spent the best years of my life putting it together, and I intend to spend the rest of my life inflicting it on my friends. Noting at an early age that things poorly recorded are shortly forgotten, I've taken great pains to put to paper unmerciful attention to detail. Determined that my journal might, at some later date, bring flawlessly to memory the width, breadth, scope, and insight of my every perception. Not to chastise, mind you, but simply to inform. This, then, in note, narrative, reminiscence, and occasionally painful detail, is my account. Obadiah Jeremiah Hezekiah Camp. Prologue. Grandpa's Journal. October 1844 would mark the end of a youthful journey and the beginning of a lifelong quest. We'd been at sea for 3 long months. It was an hour or two before dawn, and not a soul was stirring. Have you ever had that feeling that you're being watched? Right at that moment, I had that feeling in a powerful way. I turned my head and cautiously glanced down the starboard side of the ship. All at once, something aft caught my attention. I turned suddenly and had to squint and shield my eyes. There, low on the eastern horizon, just below the sail, was the biggest, most extravagant moon I've ever seen. It was the same moon that had lit the skies over the Rhine Valley during my youth, but it had always seemed distant and detached. Now, thousands of miles from the only home I'd never known, it was suddenly a comfort to see something so familiar. It was the first time that a cold, lonely night had forced me to seek comfort and companionship in that old moon. It wouldn't be the last. My name is Obadiah Jeremiah Hezekiah Camp. I know that's a mighty big mouthful, but my folks were bound and determined to name me after all 4 of my great-granddads. You can call me Obie. I was 9 years old when my family and I left our ancestral home in Germany to sail for America. I didn't realize it then, but the innocent, carefree days of my youth were rapidly drawing to a close. Ahead lay inconceivable obstacles, incredible exploits, high adventure on the western frontier, and eventually contentment and an inner peace that many never find. As I lay there on that hard wooden deck, staring into the starry stillness, the only sound was the groaning and squeaking of that old ship's rigging, and the flapping of her canvas sails in response to an intermittent breeze. I pulled the tarp up around my shoulders, and a sudden gust of wind garnished the deck with a blanket of fog that stung my chapped face and glistened on the coil of rope that served as my pillow. My brother Christoph lay on the deck at my side. Christoph was 13. He had serious doubts about this pilgrimage to America. His apprenticeship to the Count's brewmeister had been lucrative, and he'd been very hesitant to accompany his family on this risky and unnerving excursion. He missed his home and friends and had joined us reluctantly at the insistence of our father and the heartfelt pleadings of our mother. There would be no more sleep for me this night. As the velvet black skies lightened to lavender in the east, a thin layer of scarlet became barely visible in the west. It was land. It was America. Soon the melancholy stillness was replaced with hustle, bustle, and the excitement of preparation. The crewmen were busily pursuing their assigned tasks, and the passengers were crowding the decks in a frenzy of anticipation. Yesterday, freedom, opportunity, and America had been only a well-worn but very elusive dream. This morning that impossible dream was palpable. It lay on the horizon ahead of us, visible to the naked eye. It was no longer just an incredible dream. America was real. Episode 1. Jarring Bones and Rattlin Teeth. As the sun climbed gradually into the brilliant autumn sky, a purple horizon rose from a dreamlike mist and took on recognizable forms. First, the forests in their breathtaking fall foliage, then the houses and buildings, and eventually the dock and crowds of people became distinguishable on the shore. Our hearts pounded and filled with myriad emotions, joy, excitement, uncertainty, and apprehension. Those people on the dock were Americans. Soon we would be Americans too. To our west was the eastern boundary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and as the vast forests of oak and hickory gave way to farmland and fields of ripening grain, the port city of Philadelphia came into view. The port itself was clearly distinguishable by a forest of towering masts. Countless tall ships were at anchor along the expansive docks, now crowded with swarming masses of people of all nationalities. Beyond lay the historic city itself, basking in the brilliant rays of a gorgeous fall day I'd not soon forget. Our long boats were lowered and manned, our decks filled with cheering pilgrims, and our gallant ship, in full canvas and flags flying, sailed proudly into the harbor. From the docks, the crowd waved and cheered. A group of kilt-clad gentlemen promenaded across the wharf with bagpipes blaring, and all at once our normally reserved crew, in cadence with their rowing and in a wide variety of colorful accents, burst into a rousing chorus of "Blow the Man Down." My pulse raced, my spirits soared, and my heart, fit to bust, pounded like never before. Well, there was the time I discovered the Count's teenage daughter skinny dipping in the castle cistern, but that was different. Many of our fellow passengers were encumbered with steamer trunks, crates of family heirlooms, and paraphernalia of every conceivable shape, size, and description. Several families had brought along farm implements, and one couple had shipped a huge cast-iron cooking range, complete with water reservoir, 8 lids, and a dandy warming oven. Their disembarkation would require time and arrangements, not to mention intestinal fortitude and huge quantities of elbow grease. My family was traveling light. As per prearrangement, we gathered on the port side of the ship and lined up near the gangway. Christoph and I each carried one end of an old camelback trunk in one hand and an additional piece of luggage in the other. My shoulder satchel contained the journal, which I'd begun on board the ship. Mother carried a small leather satchel containing family papers, the manumission granting us the Count's permission to sail from Germany, and assorted valuables. Father, still weak from his illness but in high spirits, led the way. It's difficult to describe my feelings as we left the ship and first set foot in an unfamiliar new country. Germany had been my family's homeland for generations. Throughout our long and often miserable voyage, I'd harbored deep within myself a dull ache and an ever-present anxiety. I'd often awakened during the long nights at sea to a dry mouth and a churning stomach. Even on the good nights, there'd been a discomforting sense of leaving something irretrievable behind. This morning, as we faced the challenges of a new day filled with opportunity, all those feelings of loss and disenfranchisement were replaced by an overwhelming sense of excitement and adventure. This was a new start in a new world, and everything about it seemed fresh and inviting. I realized that a chapter of my life was ending, and intuition told me that life as I knew it was changing forever. Right now, though, my family and I were sharing the adventure of a lifetime together. Barring complications and miscommunications, Father's elder brother, Gus, was to meet us at the port. Uncle Gus had arrived in America 7 years previously and had kept in touch as well as possible considering the lamentable state of overseas mail service at the time. His crossing had been plagued by misfortune, and his wife Margaret had succumbed to disease and had been buried at sea long before reaching America. His life here in Pennsylvania had been marvelously blessed. Both of his sons had married well, and their unions had produced 9 grandchildren. He'd arrived in this country as an apprentice cobbler and now owned his own thriving shoe shop. In 7 years, he had established himself well in this country and was now a prosperous and respected member of his community. I wouldn't know Uncle Gus from Adam. I was only 2 when my uncle and his family received the Count's permission to sail for Philadelphia. Nevertheless, I joined my family in searching every person in the crowd for a familiar face. I'd occasionally had the pleasure and privilege of meeting people of different nationalities as a child, but I'd never experienced anything like this. Created in 1682 as Old Bill Penn's Holy Experiment, Philadelphia was a major port and received ships from throughout the world. Subsequently, it was peopled with travelers from the four corners of the earth, each one contributing the customs, dress, tastes, and traditions of their mother country. This port city was a melting pot, and the result was a unique blend of the best and the worst. The dock, with its open-air shops and adjacent market, along with the inns and eating establishments and taverns, all reflected this amazing diversity. The cool fall air was brisk and invigorating, and saturated with the violently competitive fragrances of hickory smoke, tobacco, wet poultry, and boiling seafood. Down toward the northern end of the pier, the open-air shops endeavored to cater to every conceivable appetite, and what little they couldn't provide was usually available in vast quantities, infinite variety, and discreet anonymity at the inns and taverns just across the street. By the time a 20-minute search had proven fruitless, that old trunk weighed a ton, and Christoph and I were exhausted. We dropped our cargo and collapsed, sitting on the luggage and staring at the ground in despair. After a moment, I realized that I was looking at the feet of either a small mountain or a very portly gentleman. I craned my neck and gazed up into the kind and beaming countenance of an elderly gentleman with a huge white beard and a belly to match. He grinned at me, eyes twinkling for a moment, and then in a markedly German accent announced, "You must be Obadiah." Mother spun around instantly with a big smile. Father, who'd been anxiously scanning faces in the opposite direction, paused momentarily, and then turning slowly, gazed into his brother's face with rapidly moistening eyes. Father had been a little teary-eyed as we bid farewell to my grandparents in Germany, but I'd never seen him actually break down and cry. Father took Uncle Gus by the hand and gazed straight into his soul, his eyes reflecting a range and depth of emotions incapable of conveyance in mere words. Then, as they wrapped their arms around each other, Father drew a long, faltering breath and, convulsing with emotion, sobbed quietly, right out loud. I held my mother's hand while fighting back the lump in my own throat, and my mother searched desperately for her handkerchief. After a moment, Christoph, unable to deal with all the unbridled emotion, cleared his throat and began collecting our luggage. Uncle Gus embraced Dad for a moment longer, kissed my mother ever so gently on the cheek, and then grabbed that camelback trunk by one handle and hoisted it up on his shoulder. "Shake a leg," he encouraged, "or we'll all miss dinner." It took several minutes to maneuver through the crowds and reach my uncle's wagon. By then, the emotions of the reunion were beginning to subside, and tongues began to loosen. Mother had begun to fill my uncle in on the events of our long voyage. The luggage loaded, my brother and I climbed into the back of the buckboard and found a seat next to a trunk on a blanket that our uncle had provided. The three adults squeezed into the driver's bench, Uncle Gus spoke to the team of mules, and Christoph and I got our very first taste of riding a springless buckboard down a cobblestone street. As we proceeded, Gus pointed out Independence Hall and related what I'm certain was a wealth of interesting local history. But I missed it all. Other than the sound of the buckboard, all I heard were jarring bones and rattling teeth.